want to do a quick introduction for the peoples on the bottom of your screen. Hi Amanda, to get started. So, and then we can begin. So if Hillary, if you would like to introduce yourself and let them know what you're, and Sarah, let them know what you're gonna be doing in what capacity.
Hey folks, my name is Hillary Allen. Glad to be on the call tonight. I'm going to be doing tech support. So if you have any issues, feel free to chat me and I can see if I can help.
Hi, I'm Sarah Lund, and I am here to support this important conversation. And feel free to reach out to me as well.
And so first things first, because I know this is webinar style, so we're not able to see you and connect in that way, but if you will put your name, maybe any kind of healing practice that you have, what your specialty areas are, where you are situated in the world, and your pronouns, and then we can at least begin to engage you in that way. So again, I am Vahisha Hasan. I use she, her pronouns. I am with Movement and Faith. I'm the executive director of Movement and Faith, where I live and breathe in the intersections of faith, social justice, and mental health. And Diana, if you will introduce yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Diana Quinn. I use she, her pronouns. I am located on Anishinaabe Aki, which is otherwise known as Ann Arbor, Michigan, and work here in Ann Arbor as well as Detroit. I'm a core collaborator with the Healing Justice Women of Color Collective Healing by Choice, as well as a care team practitioner with TRACC. And I'm grateful to be here and hold space with you all. Thanks.
Thank you, Diana. I totally forgot that I'm also a core team member of TRACC. So there's that. There's that. I might live and breathe in too many spaces. Like that's basically my takeaway. But I am also a core team member of TRACC. This is TRACC for movements, and our founder, Teresa, if you will introduce yourself and explain all the things.
Sure. Yes, so I'm Teresa Mateus. I also go by Teresa. Consider myself bicultural, so both framings of my name work for me. I am based in Chicago, Illinois, but actually was born in Bogota, Colombia. Grew up in the East Coast in New Jersey, New York metro area. I am a clinical social work by initial training, but as we'll probably talk about a lot today, a lot of my healing work and education came beyond that paradigm. I am, as Vahisha said, one of the co-founders of TRACC for Movements, which is trauma response and crisis care for movements, which we'll talk a little bit more about, just kind of what we are and what we do in a little bit. I am also co-founder of the Mystic Soul Project, which is a BIPOC centering organization at the intersections of spirituality, activism, and healing. And I would say essentially that's also where my work centers, but really grounded as a healing practitioner in the spaces that I hold.
All right, thank you, thank you. I wish I had some way to like show applause that I could clap for you, so I just have to do like that. But if we can get us started with, where are we? So Teresa, do you want to kick it off a little bit, just framing how we're going to spend our time today?
Yeah, so I'll give everyone just a little background, because I know folks are coming from all over and also found this training from all over, because as Vahisha and I were talking about earlier, the sort of network of social media, right? Like it seemed that the training and the link for this training spread like wildfire, and I think for a reason, right? That we're in such a moment that folks are doing this work or wanting to do this work, or are literally going out tonight to do more of this work, right? And are wanting to be in community. So at core, TRACC for Movements really is we want it to be a community and a network of healers, and healers being across a broad spectrum of, as you define what that is in the work you do in the world. And ultimately, we are a community that also we want to ground in co-teaching and co-learning. So meaning that we three who are talking today are not the be-all end-all knowledge bearers by any means, but that this is a launching pad for a larger, deeper conversation, and that each of you, we honor the wisdom that you're carrying into this space from your work and your knowledge in the world. and that we want to build community that way, you know, on the foundation of all of our collective wisdom, and a network that can mass mobilize, you know, to be able to support movements in this moment, but also in every moment. And TRACC very much was born out of that ethos of seeing spaces and places around the country where this healing response was needed in movement space, but there wasn't a large enough mass of folks that were sort of mutually co-trained around how to do this work to respond in a way that was abundant for the need of the moment. So really, that's what we're here to build and grow together. What we're going to offer today is really, it is 101. When we say 101, we really mean that. We can only do so much together in this initial time, but this also will not be the only time that we'll be offering this training. This is really a foundations building space. And with the acknowledgement that folks coming into this space today are coming from a wide set of backgrounds, right? People that maybe are in healing work, but have never intersected with social movements at all, and maybe really versed in their practice, but maybe not so much in movement, to folks that have been deeply embedded in movement for years, and are trying to support folks in their community in real time right now. And so we are gonna offer the most that we can with the time that we have to ground in what we're talking about, why we think it matters, and also some tangibles, you know, like what does it look like to do this work in movement? What does it look like to do this work in movement right now? And what are things that tools and resources that you can take out of this space? Some of that will be through a variety of links and resources that we also have that you can take away and carry with you and use today if you need to in the communities that you're in, and to be followed up with additional work. So we're also planning to have the next training be, I'll mention this also at the end because we'll have folks rolling in, you know, in this beginning part, but the next part of this series will be next Friday, June 12th, in which we'll get into frontline and backline practices for care. So we'll get much also more deeper into the practice modalities. But in this space today, building on a 101 framework, what are we doing here? What is this we're talking about? And how do we hold space for folks in the moment?
Absolutely. Thank you, thank you, thank you, Teresa. And on that note, again, we will give, not just theorize today, but actually name some of the things that can happen. And what we mean by dig into a little bit deeper is we will actually do those practices with you. Like we will guide them and do some of them, demonstration of it next Friday. So I think that'll also be a little helpful. But even right now, Diana is going to ground us even just for this call and just for this space, because one of the things we also want to get across is that you have to be intentional, right? So there's an intentionality in order to make these practices feasible, tangible, and normalize them, right? So in crisis places and spaces, we are reactive a lot of times, which we need, like you need to respond to the crisis at hand, but how can the response include with intentionality your breath and embodied practices and all the ways that therapeutic support can show up. So Diana is going to ground us in this moment, and then after that we will move into what is social movement trauma, what is that actually, from that framework.
Thank you, Vahisha, and welcome to everyone. Thank you so much for being here and for sharing space with us and grounding in this moment. I want to invite all of you to pause and take a second to come into your body if you can. Settle in, maybe close your eyes if you're able to, and if that's comfortable for you, or just cast your gaze downward. Place one hand on your lower belly if you'd like, and just feel into your breath there in the belly. Feel the belly rise and fall with your breathing. And just take a moment to notice what sensations are present in your body at this time. The weight of your seat against the chair, or the sensation of your feet on the ground. The temperature of the air on your skin. The breath as it comes into and exhales out of your body. And just taking a moment to anchor yourself and ground into the earth where you are at this time, acknowledging that we are located in so many different places. Many of us here on Turtle Island, some possibly outside of this region, acknowledging the first people of these lands, acknowledging the diaspora of African descendants and immigrants and peoples from all of our lands, acknowledging our ancestors that have brought us here, giving thanks to their resilience, accessing the gifts and the wisdom that they carry through us that is being activated in our DNA at this time, because our people have long been standing in moments like this and tapping into the ways that our people have moved through and come together is available to us now in this time. So whenever you're ready, you can stretch a little, move your body, come back into the space and join us.
And so now you are, and I know I am, I'm feeling a levity, and that is needed. I feel like the tone of my voice, like, so maybe name even in the chat what maybe changed in this moment, what moved through you. Like my tone has changed, my heart beat, which I value, right, is regulated in such a way. So this feels good. Thank you so much, Diana. So we're gonna start with topically, what is social movement trauma? And this is partly important because Teresa and I were in this really cool space at Mystic Soul a few years ago, and we were sitting in there, we kept talking about trauma and talking about trauma with clinicians and practitioners and healers, and someone said, hey, can you stop for a second and actually say, what is your definition of trauma? Because it seems to be different than what my understanding is, even maybe in a DSM-5 way, or our understandings of trauma. So we just want to frame a couple of things quickly before we get into some of those other things. So I think Diana's going to start us off with what is social movement trauma.
So I just first want to take a moment to acknowledge that my framing for and positioning with how I come to this work is grounded and rooted in the tradition and lineage of healing justice practice, which comes out of organizers, Black and Brown, femme, QT-POC, disability justice, environmental justice organizers, who responding to ableism and burnout in movement, acknowledged and responded to the need to center healing within movement, not as something that we take a pause, tap out, burn out, and leave movement to do. So I first want to, name that and acknowledge some of the lineages that are at the root, including Kindred, Southern Healing Justice Collective, Rock Dove, Healing by Choice, which I'm honored to be a member of, acknowledging the many teachers and forebears really of this lineage. So speaking to that, one of the things that I have observed and learned about social justice movement trauma is the difference from other forms of trauma, which just can be possibly single incidents or even, ongoing individual trauma, is the historical, intergenerational, institutional, as well as personal individual trauma that this makes movement trauma complex and compounded, and also the ways in which movement work is never done. It's ongoing, right? The issues that we're facing. So the nature of that can create a high stress environment. And for individuals, there's a great level of burnout and physiologic, response of activated sympathetic nervous systems, high levels of cortisol, not getting sometimes needs met, physical needs met for rest, for taking a break to eat, just basic things of that nature. So, bringing healing into movement is acknowledging that we're all doing our healing while we're in movement. And that includes not only tending to those at the front lines and those, at what we're calling the backlines, but also ourselves and, taking the time to, for self and collective care, the importance of that.
Thank you, Diana. For this part of this space, I am specifically, this is Vahisha Hasan, if you just came on. I'm speaking a little specifically to the nature of distrust of formal therapy in like Black and Brown communities, and kind of valid reasons that even this language and forms of like mental health, therapy, counseling is not going to be sought by some of the most marginalized bodies who often need it the most. And so when you're contextualizing this in social movement trauma, some level of understanding that there may be this outcry nationally and visibly, and also in some of the most deeply impacted communities, that outcry is not new, right? So just because maybe you're healing, entering into it in a healing space, the whole world is now entering into a space that Black and Brown people, vulnerable bodies, queer, trans bodies live in all the freaking time, right? So just having awareness of that, and that there can be distrust there, because it's like, oh, where were you last week? I ain't get no healing last week, right? So you wasn't offering the thing, are you still gonna be here? Post the hashtag, right? Like, so keep in mind some of the nature of those dynamics, and I'm speaking obviously very specifically from a Black, a place of Blackness, which I value and honor and love. Thank you, God. But for many of our communities, the making, like the actual process of cooking, the eating of Sunday dinner, barbershop places, hair salons, the cookout. When we talk about the cookout, right, we be like, you ain't invited to the cookout. Well, part of the reason you invited or not invited is because those can be therapeutic spaces for us. They have traditionally and culturally been therapeutic spaces for us. So your approach to healing, your approach to offering some of these things needs to honor the cultural ways that folks were already healing themselves, already offering communal healing, right? And so with even when, and I'll say, even different faith contexts, whatever that faith is. I am just, for full disclosure, I am a reverend with the Progressive Baptist out of Christ Missionary Baptist Church here in Memphis, Tennessee. But my large portion of my family are Baha'i, large portion of my family are of the nation. There's a reason that my whole entire name is Arabic in origin, right? And so there were healings and therapeutic spaces available before you showed up. So keep that always humbly in mind. And then you have this global pandemic. We're in the middle of still a corona apocalypse, right? And so these natural cultural ways that we show up in spaces for ourselves have been taken away in a lot of ways. And so in this trauma space, it's compounded. It's just loss on top of grief, on top of not also having a way to express it, a way for it to move through the body communally. I want you to hear that. Like Black and Brown folks been moving stuff through our bodies together, not just individual care practices sitting in a room by yourself. But we don't call it that. We don't necessarily name it in that language, but don't take our deep traditional wisdom from us. Like we ain't never done some healing work on ourselves, right? So the crisis is elevated. The need for emotional care is elevated. It's personal, it's communal, it's national, it's global. And so talk therapy is not always going to be the move. Like talk therapy is not going to be the way. It's not just in terms of ability, right? So you have regular, like different spectrums of ability where that's an impacted, but then also just culturally, talk therapy might not be the move. And so if you are traditional, and when I say traditional here, to be clear, I'm not normalizing, but here Western, white-based methodology. I went and got a whole master's degree and learned about how all the white people, what they studied, what they said, and then they had the nerve to say, now go give this out in a culturally competent way. Anybody else get that kind of education where they were like, this is what the white people did, this is what the white people said, and now go give it to all the races upon all the earth, right? And so that's not a thing. And so if you are in that traditional space, right, be open and ready. Hear both. So that's some individual work that you have to do. Be open, and then some external work that you would need to do in being ready to refer people and offer healing resources, additional healing resources available to them that's outside of the scope of your traditional practice, and also in your languaging, not calling it alternative. It's like, because even by calling it alternative, you are standardizing Westernness and whiteness, right? So no. So think about the language in the way that you offer, and we're gonna speak more specifically in what those specific practices can look like. But just quickly, that can be body work, Reiki, somatic healers, less formal versions of group therapy, and we'll dig into this a little bit more. Did you want to say more in this specific space, Teresa, or did you want to go to providing the movement trauma care being different?
Yeah, I'm just gonna, just brief. What I'd like, I think, both of y'all had said so much of what is the core component of what makes not just the space of social movement trauma, but also the necessary care, is gonna look, the range and the variability is gonna be wider. And as you already said, is gonna be way out of the context of what many of us learned as our first line of like, this is what healing is. It was really in the context of this is what Western mental health is, right? And that's why I said in the beginning that my training may have started with getting a master's in clinical social work, but actually the education of the practices that I do now that is part of movement healing did not come from that frame. I had to in many ways unlearn, decolonize the frameworks that I had been given, to the context I'd been given to offer healing, and reframe that to what actually worked and was actually useful for the spaces and places that I was offering care. And the other thing I would like to say, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go through, is that when we talk about cultural context, movement is a cultural context, right? There is language, there is ways of functioning, ways that people are interacting with each other that are specific. So when you go into any new cultural context, you have to have a cultural intuition, a cultural learning curve, right? And that is very true about movement as it is in many other spaces, besides just being, a lot of BIPOC leadership, QTPCO leadership, folks that are also multiply traumatized before they even got to the movement. The trauma is what brought them into the movement. Like, I am traumatized because my community is dying, so I show up traumatized. That's actually what motivated me to do the work in movement. And then the hard part is that then my work in movement traumatizes me, right? Because it's traumatizing to be on the front lines of watching people hurt, of trying to speak out about it, of potentially being in harm's way to do all of that. And so there is little patience and little threshold for folks that have not done the learning, have not built the learning curve to know the context they're coming into. And so a lot of times, a lot of the sort of training and education I do is with traditional, like you said, right? What we call traditional, which is really Western white mental health care practice, who really, really want to help, but have not yet learned. And that's also fine. That's part of what TRACC wants to do, is offer people the bridge learning so that you actually know what you're doing about the cultural context you're entering into, but that they want to help, but the lack of knowledge of the cultural context of movement becomes the barrier. Forget about your practices not meeting the needs. Forget about the fact that you maybe have not done work on front lines. If you don't know movement going into movement, people will write you off. You know, like I have been sized up and been like, what do you know about this? What do you know about movement? Like, I don't care if you had 15 years learning trauma stuff and you've been providing trauma care. If you don't understand movement, I'm walking out this door right now, you know? And so like part of this, not just this training, but TRACC as a context, is we want people to be equipped, right? We want people to be able to show up. But there's a huge learning curve for folks, and this is not everyone on the call, right? We got a spectrum. But for folks that do not come from a background that know movement, you might have been a private practice doing trauma therapy for 50 years, but actually it does not apply to the context we're talking about fully, that there's a cultural contextual learning that's necessary. And then the other piece I just want to name is that also a lot of us come from all kinds, you know, you mentioned, Vahisha, like the vastness of also spiritual and often faith religious based backgrounds. And also, so there are a lot of folks that come from like chaplain lineage, pastor lineage, and those folks also show up en masse in moments like this and are like, I want to help. The other cautionary note is I want to make clear is a lot of social movement is faith phobic, is faith, the language of faith or saying faith is a trigger in and of itself, because those faith institutions have also stood to resemble and to mirror white supremacy and marginalization, and all those institutionalized problems have shown up in the institutions of religion. So if you're showing up as a pastor and you want to help, I need you to understand that potentially your collar and your title will automatically also, similar to traditional mental health, be a barrier to somebody wanting to come to you for care. It is not an insurmountable barrier if you can, again, learn the cultural context, learn what is care that can be useful and appropriate for the community that you're in the moment you're in. But for everybody that holds these various professionalisms that have historically been centered as the primary professionalism, right, to provide care, there requires a vast amount of humility to often step back, right, from the collar, from the licensure, and actually start from the ground up again, learning the cultural context of movement, learning the folks that have come into movement, the history and lineage of that trauma, and then going, and now how do I learn what I can do for this space? So I just want to ground us in that as our foundation.
And I appreciate that so much. That's why I even said, for full disclosure, right? I am a reverend, and this is an orientation and part of my identity, and I feel like my purposing that I own and that I honor, but it needs to be honored in a reoriented way. You need to unlearn some things that are true in your faith spaces are not true in movement spaces. And if that is not a place where you are ready to enter into that level of humility, that orientation, to come in a posture of learning, that this is just not yet a space for you, right? And it doesn't, like Teresa said, it doesn't have to discount you, but some unlearning has to happen before you can be a do no harm place or do less harm place for other people. And that's just the deal. I'm being asked, like literally right now in a text message, if I will help train clergy people to not come in and try to have church at the movement stuff. And I don't mean, not in a joyful, expressive way, but I mean in the way that the way leadership works sometimes in faith spaces, the way just traditional practices, faith practices, whatever that orientation of faith is, they don't apply, like they don't apply. And attempting to apply them is projecting in a way that does cause harm, especially for folks who have been harmed specifically by that practice, specifically by those practices. And so, so thank you. So you've gone into kind of where we're going next, and that is, how is providing movement trauma care different from other trauma care? So we want you to hear some of these distinguishing places, and Diana's going to start for us.
Yes, thank you. Yeah, you've already really started touching on so many of these really important points, and sort of extrapolating from the sort of perspective about, you know, I think therapists and faith leaders and, you know, having coming in with the cultural context of movement. I mean, I would say the same for even health providers. Like, I mean, obviously there's a space for medics and, you know, there's specific training for medical professionals to receive on the ground, you know, training to meet the need on the ground, but also framing, you know, even like a decolonized like medical perspective where, you know, the physician is not, I mean, like asking permission, you know, asking what someone needs, you know, sort of meeting the need in a way that's probably very different from the way that medical practitioners are, you know, used to approaching things. This would also go for, you know, other types of practitioners from, you know, even, you know, folks that are doing energy work or, you know, body work or holding emotional space. One of the consistent messages that I've been hearing, and this is, you know, one of the first principles of guiding principles for healing by choice, is we begin by listening, you know, so start by asking what is needed and responding to the need. So which, you know, even though we have so many modalities, so many skills, such a burning, you know, kind of impulse to step in and provide, to be of service. You know, there's a line between, you know, the pushing or inflicting a healing on someone, or, you know, kind of coming in with an agenda, and, you know, really kind of pausing and listening, you know, to what the need is. So that's one piece. And, you know, kind of along similar lines, I would also add taking cues from leadership, especially for folks that are newer to movement spaces. Obviously, some of the folks on the call are very seasoned, so this is again like a 101, you know, message. But you know, for folks who are new to being in these spaces, you know, there are organizers, there is leadership, there is, you know, particularly in this moment, following the cues of Black leadership and, you know, kind of putting yourself where you're asked to be, which may not be in the, you know, kind of like glamorous role. It might be in, you know, kind of an assistant behind the scenes role. So that's a message. Also just really wanting to speak, you know, to decentering, decentering ourselves and acknowledging that, you know, healers are, we're sort of demystifying and decentralizing who is a healer, because we all have, you know, the capacity, right, to do that. So sometimes the ask is actually for those of us who have skills to provide trainings and to, you know, help disperse our knowledge and expertise and skills or medicines into communities so that they can, you know, directly provide those services for one another. So, and then lastly, I'll just say, you know, in general, slowing down. There's a tremendous amount of urgency in this moment. And, you know, as Vahisha mentioned, you know, this is not new. This has been happening. This is, you know, preparing for the long game and, you know, the endurance, you know, kind of path here. So those are a couple thoughts I have.
Thank you. Perfect. Perfect, actually. And I think Teresa touched on how providing some of this trauma care is different. Movement trauma care is different from other types of trauma care. I want to mention, and I'm needing to breathe just to see that, like hear that, right? I'm needing to breathe just to get this out. So while we are saying that they are that providing that care is different, I also still want you to hear that many of the same traumas that people were experiencing prior to this specific type of crisis work is also happening in movement spaces. And by that, I mean being physically violated, emotionally, emotional violence, just levels of abuse are still happening. So keep in mind, people may still be going out to movement spaces and lift their voice and still coming home to a place where their body is not honored, right? Or they're going out into movement spaces and violence is enacted upon them, not just by in a state violence way, but in community societal ways that were already harming them in that ways before. And by that, just to be clear, I mean like assault, rape, all of these types of things. And so although the spaces can be different, some of the traumatic things that are happening are still happening in some of these spaces. So preparation for that. And then we already touched on it. So exactly, by comrades too. See what I'm saying to you? I just saw Louisville, but yes, the comments are coming so quickly. And it's like, you know, how we had to move along that spectrum of where they were like, oh, it's relationship rape, it's date rape, like rape is rape, right? And so yes, so comrades are doing things, other folks are doing things, and not just that, but just assault, just lots of things are still happening. So be prepared for the differences and also the similarities, right? So keep one of the aspects of white supremacy is this really polarized thinking, this all or nothing. So you're going to have to really to get in some both and, right? Work on some both and in your body. So then the last thing I wanted to, the last thing I wanted to touch on, again, said before, but the ongoing nature of compounded trauma. Ongoing nature of compounded trauma in brown and Black communities. So these are folks who were already traumatized before there was a hashtag, folks who are already traumatized before we had to watch 150 times the person, you know, being murdered or their body laying in the street for ridiculous amounts of time. Just all of these different, just being in workspaces that are not honoring of our lives. All of these things were happening already. And then, as Teresa said, we come into movement spaces with that trauma. We bring that trauma to those spaces, and then we're re-traumatized in new and different ways. So that's part of that difference in care. And being a healer, it's just really important to have that level of analysis as you're holding healing space for the people. Because the last thing I know I want with my therapist, I don't have time, emotional capacity, or maybe even language in that moment to try to explain just how my Black skin in and of itself is a place of trauma for me. If I gotta walk you through a handout, or I gotta pull up my own training material to train you on that first, we got a situation. This is not a helpful space anymore, right? And so those are things you're gonna have to sit with in your body. And then because we have spectrum of privilege that shows up, like I had access to education, formalized, let me be clear, formalized, back to the standardization of what is education. So I had access to standardized education. So if I'm in a space and somebody's providing a thing and they're saying something that hits my place of privilege, right? That is not the space for you. Like that, you can't get free in that space. You're gonna need to go to your healer and get free, right? That's not the moment for you. So be prepared, undergirded, do your own work, so that when your places are hit, you don't bleed on the person in front of you that you're supposed to be holding the healing space for. So that's another aspect, not just the externalized aspect of providing the care, but the internalized process that you as a healer are going to need to sit with, be equipped with, and have a place for you to go and debrief. One of the freaking I'm grateful for aspects of TRACC for movements is when, in part of Teresa's vision, she put in that we would have a buddy, like we would have a healer buddy, right? That we would walk through this process. So when I am at the end of my wits, that don't have no more wits, I ain't got no wits left. And y'all know by wits, I mean Fs. I don't have no Fs to give. I have no more Fs to give, right? So I have a healer buddy that I can go to, and we've agreed to be in relationship to hold space for each other, so that we continue to be positive spaces for other people. So next we want to talk about the difference between frontlines and backline care. Oh, I'm sorry, Teresa, did you want to enter into that space as well, or go into the next?
No, I'll bridge it into the next piece.
So just as a header for you, we're talking about the difference between front lines and back lines, because that's part of languaging, right? Front lines and back line. And what does that care look like? And how do you as a healer, practitioner, decide where you fit into that space? And that is work, I will say, that I spent half the morning doing that work with a clergy person. Like, they're like, okay, Vahisha, this is my concept of social change. Where and how should I fit in this moment, so that I am in my lane, but doing it well? So this is a space to talk about. So difference between front lines and back lines care.
Yeah, I think this is important, and it's also, like everything else, is a grayscale, right? And it's one that you might flux across and through in any given time, place, and moment. The one thing I will note, and Vahisha was bringing in the ways in which we carry carrying from the trauma that we bring into movement to also the trauma that can happen in movement space. I think that's so hard because we consistently want to find the space, right? The space that's going to hold us and that really is going to embody everything we want. And I think it can be heartbreaking because movement can feel like that when folks enter it. This space is lifting up these needs, right? And then you can show up and people can hurt you in movement space. And also additionally, a lot of the work of TRACC has been about, like, how do we also work with movements to build, to support them building foundations of movements that don't continue to do harm within movement, right? Because that's the hard part when you're doing this intense work. And as many of you know, in this moment, and maybe in moments that you've been involved in movements for years, is that when things get really intense, we hurt each other. We don't mean to, but everything is sensitive like a live nerve, right? And so your live nerve, stumbling into the next person who's a live nerve, and they're stumbling into the next person who's a live nerve. So a lot of hurt happens in movement space. And so I want to be clear about that, because a lot of times I think as healers, we think, how are we going to help repair the wounds that people are holding from what's happening in the outside world, right? On the other side of things. But the threshold for what people can hold in the most intensity within movements when things reach their peak is a very low threshold. And most of the focus is on what is the agenda, right? And so you can be ramming into other people with your emotional harm and vice versa. They're doing the same thing. And you don't even get to pay attention to healing that, because the focus is what is the agenda for the movement right now. And so by the time you get over the peak of the intensity, people are in shambles, people are broken down. And so when we talk about both front lines and back lines, I also want to look at that in trajectory of time. Like, I love that so many people are motivated to show up today, but we're also really looking for healers that are willing to show up and be here for the long haul, right? And what that means is, will you be able to be there 365 days a year, for movement space? Because 99% of the healing work is not done, in the front of the protest, like, Diana was saying, in the flashy place, right? In the place where we're in the picture frame, right? 99% is done behind that wall, right? And it's done because people are breaking maybe in those moments, but they don't have time to work on it. That's the nature of crisis, and that's the nature of trauma, is when you are still in the front lines, you do not have the time to do the deep work that you will need, right? But you cannot do in that moment. In that moment, you have to get to physical safety, or you have to tend to someone else, or you have to debrief on what just happened that day, so you have a different tactic for the next day. There are 1,000 things going on. And so, yes, we'll talk about the particular things that you can do now today on the front line of a protest, but that's just 1% of the longer trajectory of the care that's needed within movements. And one of these series of the trainings, I really want to go in deeper to the movement cycle, so that folks that don't know how movements function, we can actually break down and look at what is the cycle of how movement functions, and what is the different set of care that's needed at these different junctures of a movement cycle. Right now, we're in what I call a manic cycle. And if you Google, I'll send the link out for Movement Net Lab. They have amazing graph and material on the movement cycle. But they call it the heroic phase. I also call it the manic phase, because everything's moving so fast. And so I think the longer term, training and education that we can offer is going deeper into that. That's its own whole training. But there are different phases of movements. And so different things are also needed at the different phases of movements. And so I want to, we'll tease that out in another time. But in terms of front lines and back lines, I want to talk both about the moment, like the moment when things are most acute, and then the longer continuum. So there's still, even when we're talking about like in a moment of protest, you know, in a moment of like the last week that we've been in, even in the most acute places, there's still front lines and back lines that are distinct for that moment, right? So there's literally the person with the armband who's walking alongside people ready to help and provide aid and support, like in a moving, you know, line of folks that are in an action in that day. And there's also backlines folks within that day, you know, who are back at a backward location, you know, might be a community center or whatever that folks have set up as a sort of base of operations for usually, you know, medics, so medical and emotional care. And there's a, you know, there's a gamut of a bunch of stuff that's set up for folks there. So even that, even in the moment of an action, there's a front line and a back line. And also even beyond the folks that are providing care at the backline location, like Diana said really well, they might have an outpouring of 1,000 people who say we want to help on the day of, right? Well, maybe only 50 of those people are doing the care. Some other people might be calling around for additional resources. Some other people might be tasked to do jail support. So even if you show up as an emotional healer in a space, you may not be utilized for those skills, particularly when we're in an urgent moment, that there's things that take precedence that you might be asked to do. And so some of that also goes back to the humility of the space. Is the answer is yes. If you're showing up and saying, yes, I will show up, then whatever you're asked to do, the answer is yes, right? Within ability, right? Within your own threshold of what your own triggers are. We also have to pay attention to that. Like I've also seen a lot of folks that push themselves to do the thing on the front line because they think they're supposed to, but they're already hella triggered, right? By their own, what they're embodying, what they're holding, you know, by their own historical trauma and experience in their bodies. So also sometimes what we do is we say, I can't do that, but I can do this. So when I say if you're going to show up, say yes, what I mean is be aware of what your yes is too, right? What are the boundaries of my yes? And also don't feel guilty about the boundaries of your yes, because you can do harm to yourself and others if you show up pushing yourself to be in a space that isn't healthy for you to be in that moment. So really we have to analyze even before we show up, where am I at in my body? Where am I at in my whole self? What are the boundaries of my yes that I can give today? And that may change tomorrow, right? But today, what is the boundary of my yes? And assess that first so that when you show up, you know that you can say yes to what's needed. If you're going to show up on the front lines, you've already assessed, I can be here, right? And if you need to leave, that you also can leave. That's the essence of also when you're doing on the ground support, of really having a team of folks that you are mutually relying on each other. So that when somebody's like, I can't, you know what I mean? I cannot go to the front of that police line right now. I'm so triggered. Even though you showed up at the protest and you were good to go at 8 a.m., right? By noon, you couldn't. And so you also need a really good team that you can mutually be supported by, where folks potentially that are not holding that trigger in that moment can step forward so that you can step back. So that's why I say it's super amorphous and it's really gray, because it can shift even within one day where you are and what you call frontline and backline and what your yes is for that moment. So I think goes back also to what Vahisha said about doing our own work. Our own work, part of it is assessing our capacity so that when we're showing up, we can show up 100%, and that we know we have a team that we can step back if we need to step back. And I'll go back to one of really the intentions of TRACC is to build this national network with regional hubs so that we have folks that we have a common language on what we're talking about, on what we can do, and that those people, like Vahisha said, like we have within our one-to-one care team right now, can have battle buddies, can have the folks that say, you know what, if you just need somebody to go off to the side and you need to talk to, it's okay for us to do that too. We need that. When things get really intense, we also are holding that in our bodies and holding that in our energy. And I'll go back again. Maybe you've done trauma support, you know, maybe you've done trauma therapy for 50 years. It is different in the middle of in the middle of an action, in the middle of the mayhem, potentially in the middle of witnessing violence against people's bodies, the emotional violence that you're holding for other people. It is different. And so really being able to know what we can show up for and having a team of people that we're really committed to co-caring for each other as healers is very, very important. So there's front lines and there's back lines, even in the moment on the day of an action. You know, front lines would be more folks that are right up front and center, you know, doing stuff in the mid of the actual action. Backlines on the day of are the folks that are more hubbed at a space that is sort of what we would say in the kind of safe zone, right? That can change within a day, but theoretically in a sort of safer zone physically. And you may be tasked to do 1,000 things that have absolutely nothing to do with what you showed up for that day. So that humility of willingness to say yes, like I will carry this stuff out if my body has that ability. Yes, I will, you know, sit and take people's names down for this list, whatever it is, right? And then there's front lines and back lines when we think of the longer continuum. And you can be both and, you can be either or. Again, it can change over time. Front lines in the larger continuum really are the people that are there when the things are happening, that are sort of embedded in the action in the moment. Backlines is everything else. It's the other 364 days of the year. And what you can do from the backlines can be vast. It can include providing support within communities of just trauma education, right? Just baseline, like, because one of the things I think is so important in movements that we continue to do more of is that people need to know before they get to the crisis what trauma is. People need to know before they get to the crisis who their supports can be. It can't all be, we can't keep mobilizing the day of a thing happening and then try to build a network on that day, right? We have to have better supports that actually for us are built on a longer term continuum, and that we are actually embedding ourselves in the community of movement in an intentional way. Because again, going back to who is trusted and who isn't, if you show up on the day of a thing and you're like, I'm here and like, come see me as your therapist, you are not yet a trusted person in community. You know, so you need to be showing up for movement. You need to be showing up in movement space. You need to be connected to movement leadership. You need to be in relationship with your community and the issues that are in your community. It's more than just saying, refer out to me as your therapist. It really, really is, because you are not yet a trusted person in community just because your name's on a list. And so what it means to be backlines, yeah, somebody said relationship, exactly. It is deeply relational. And again, remember, there's all this valid mistrust within movements. People are coming in and infiltrating. People are pretending to be this thing and then they're not. You know, people are coming in to observe folks and write down names and take them back, you know, and report them somewhere. Those things are real. And so being in a relationship over a long continuum in community is deeply, deeply important for people to then, the last line of what you're doing as a healer in community and movement, 364 days of the year, is being referred to, getting a client referred to you so that you can provide one-on-one therapy or one-on-one spiritual care. That is the last line of what happens, because they need to trust you enough that they're going to actually show up there for the thing that you want to offer them, which is oftentimes why these like instant, let's mobilize as healers and tell people we'll support them dies out real fast, is because all it ends up being is a Google Doc with names on a list, right? That dies because people don't know them. They don't know the names on the list. And so lots of times then people they're not going to come to you for care, even if you do have great things to offer. So 99% of the work is backlines for all of us, you know, throughout the year. Building connection with community, being in relationship. And you can, and what's great about that is it's a parallel process. While you are doing that, that is helping you also learn more about the culture of movement, learn more about the way that movement functions. So it's actually also, it's your continuing education that's happening at the same time, right? You are getting the learning that you need to provide the care by being in community with movement folks. You are getting the trust of movement folks so that they actually will get the care from you when they acutely need it. And you can provide also resourcing in those times that are not crisis. So I give this example from, I did 8 years of work with combat trauma, and what I will say is that I'm always in opposition from war, but the continuum of process within the mechanism of providing response to healing is robust because they've done it for a long time. And so there was learning from that was really helpful for me to actually translate over when I was doing movement work. And one of the big things was this ability to provide education to community before they need it, and provide the connection points to the resource, to the network, so that when people need it later, they know who they know who to call, they know who to connect to, they know who to ask in the community to show up in an action in the first place. Nobody's going to ask you to show up if they don't know who you are. And then being able to provide that trauma education. So being able to say, this is what trauma looks like. This is what it feels like. You might be experiencing this already before you go on the front lines. Maybe you want to think about, are you in a place to go on the front lines today or not? For them as movement folks. Also, this is what might show up after you're in an action. And so you can think about these things. And then we are the network to support you, through this, and we're consistent. We're going to be here, not just for the one day, right, but for the long haul. So frontlines and backlines is all of that. And in many ways, we should be doing all of it, a continuum of all of it in terms of the backlines work year round. And not everybody is meant for the front lines work. Not everybody is going to show up at a protest for many, many reasons, right? Physically, your body doesn't have capacity. In this moment, we have the double function of COVID in the physical air around us. So if you are an immune compromised person, if you are somebody who is a higher threshold of danger for going in physical public, then that is a real thing too. And so we have to account for what is our capacity. And then also there's 1,000 roles, right? Even within the healer continuum of movement, there are 1,000 things that we can do. And I really genuinely believe we only build what I think is this movement of healers, that we need right now by filling all of the needs and all the roles. So I also want you to know that you need to figure out what you can do. Again, what is the yes you are capable of? Live into that in humility, and also be really, really aware that not everybody is going to be on the front lines, and that is okay. That is important to know, that if that's not your place, if that's not the space you can be in, there are 1,000 other things to do. So with that, I will sort of pass it along to Diana to talk a little bit more about backlines.
So Teresa, you pretty much spoke to most of the points that I wanted to make. So I'm just going to defer to Vahisha to speak a little bit about cases so that we have time to kind of at least touch on some of the modalities that we want to share today.
Exactly. I was going to say the same thing, Teresa. Like, you covered it with like a blanket, like a weighted blanket. You did that. Okay. So we are good. I don't think a lot of space needs to further from us needs to be spent there. And so, yeah, I'm going to get into specific cases, and I'm partly giving these cases so maybe you can find yourself in this, right? So you can think about your location, both your identity and the care that you're going to give, but also your local orientation, what's happening where you are. And so I give a couple of examples. One, I'm not going to name the space, but there was a protest healing space, a healing space set up in a protest environment. It was amazing. Like, it was so organized. It had like a table for food. There was a room and space for somatic work. There was a private space for like faith expressions. There was another space. Like, it was so, I was like, wow, this is like, I can't handle how organized it was, but there were very few people there. Right. And when I say very few, I mean sprinkle, very few. There were much more people there to give the offering and organize volunteers than there were people taking participation of the offering, because partly the response that was provided was not exactly what people were asking for or needed. So this gets into the need, the response matching the need. And then also location, this location, like, be mindful. You got to come out of your body, your identity, your context. This location was so centralized that there were militarized vehicles and forces within the same block. Like, you could touch them and look at this. Look, you could see them. So the deeply impacted community folk were not going to come to walk past the militarized vehicles to come get this care in this space. And then outside were these beautiful heartbeats that were so welcoming and so ready to provide this amazing care. And they were all white. Every last one of them were white. And so it was just it was a difficult space for folks to enter into, even though there was so much ridiculously great care being offered inside. And that's in addition to spectrums of identities that were available to offer it, but you don't know that from the outside window dressing, right? So this is really important to think through. It's really easy sometimes for us to start initiatives, like make initiatives, as opposed to what Teresa was talking about, already being in connection with the local people on the ground and actually assessing their need rather than just like responding to a thing that is not needed in that moment. And maybe that would be needed later when the militarized vehicles were gone, right? So you still could do the exact same initiative, but at a different time. And then specifically, I'm from Charlotte, North Carolina originally. And, you know, we had Charlotte uprising when Keith Lamont Scott was murdered by the police. And then we had subsequent deaths from there. But we were able to set up, two big difference. We had minimally two centralized places of organizing. So hear that, not just places, you know, where the clergy meet before they go walk out 2 by 2, like from the ark, but but centralized places of organizing where the actual organizing were happening. So two set, and people knew what they were. So in those places, we were able to get clinicians and practitioners and healers we made a schedule, a volunteer schedule, and they gave 24-hour around the clock support of whatever healing that they offered in those centralized locations. So if that is available to you in your localized setting, if you can, part of your healing work could be, hey, anybody with a key to a building willing to make this a centralized place where this healing can happen. And then what can that look like? And then also in terms of relationship, even though some of these relationships did have to happen on the ground, like we built it as it happened, but meaning relationships between the healing work. So the people who were doing physical work, meaning medical response. So the people who were giving medical response, we would have little mini orientations all the time as people came onto their shifts, so that the people who were providing what would be seen as just directly medical care would offer, before they left that space, that person could then be handed to someone who could provide them healing space as well. So that transitioning of it demystified it in the moment. It destigmatized it in the moment. It's often easier to respond. You know, I took out contacts, right? I took out contacts of screaming people who had been tear gassed and pepper sprayed. So then we did lots of orientation of, hey, wear your glasses to the protest. But, so for people who are providing that physical care, to be able to directly, as someone said in the comments, directly link them in that space to this healing care. So that was really, really helpful. But again, something that's, it's more easily facilitated when you have a centralized organizing location. And then secondly, which one did I want to get to? So Asheville, I lived in Asheville, North Carolina, in the mountains for several years post Charlotte, and we did not have a centralized organizing center, right? So that was not something that was totally available. We had small pockets of where the organizing meetings would happen on the porch in the basements, right? But in terms of an organizing place where all the people who came from all over came, we didn't have that. So we did actually have to go. We had to go with the Google Doc of who would be able to provide care, but we also printed it out, and we got people to go out and canvas people who were in relationship with the local community, right? So to hear that they were part of the community, they were in relationship with the community, they had to some extent relationship to the folks facilitating that healing care. So at least there was two separations of relationship, and then those canvassers went out into the neighborhood and said, hey, here's the list of Black folks. It was very clear. Here's a list of Black folks willing and able to provide care. Then it expanded to, there was a PLC, QT PLC, and it went by PLC and all those things to like, these are a list of people who can provide this type of care. But again, it was being done by those within and of the communities. So it came from a place, not just like the flyer person who you go out, you went in the grocery store and you come out and the whole parking lot is flyered with wherever we're supposed to go turn up, right? So it wasn't because that's disconnected. And keep in mind, that's how it feels with you emailing out some random Google Doc where they are that level. You just posted a flyer in a disconnected way, even though you might have done really good work putting those resources together. And then the other example that I'll name, so I went into, if you have a centralized organizing place, there are ways you can move. If you don't have a centralized organizing place, there are still ways that you can move, right? And then when the fire at Highlander happened, where the Nazis burned down one of the office building at Highlander, because of relationship already established, myself and a whole nother set of healers. So I also hear that the institution didn't just be like, oh, I just know this one person. Oh, I just know, like, that many and multiple people came to offer in different ways. And so I was one of the offerings, and I did mostly one-on-one, just got in the car and drove there, right? And just did one-on-one support and healing space for the staff who, a couple of them lived on the grounds, right? And for those that commuted in, and what it felt like to be in this very rural place, and what that could look like. So that happened, but I also hear another aspect of that care. So if you have those type of relationships with impacted institutions or places where the things are happening, but I also did a very high level assessment. And by high level assessment, I mean not breaking the confidentiality of the individual people that I met with. So did a high level assessment of what the institution could do to continue to offer long-term care, what continuing care should look like, those types of things. And then the last part I'm gonna note about that for y'all is I consulted, guess who? Just take a wild guess. Like I jumped in my car and was like, okay, I'm going to Highlander. I'm driving from the Memphis to New Market, Tennessee. And who did I call? Raise your hand. Teresa, yeah. So I called Teresa on the way because I have deep, background and work in one-on-one care and holding emotional spaces, and what that could look like, especially being, in my Black bodysuit with other folks of color and ranges of identities in that space. But it was specifically a fire, right? And I had not worked. I didn't have any my level experience of how to address things that could be unique to it being a fire, to there being a burning, to there being a building physical loss on, like, in that way, right? So I called Teresa I let her know that when I was leaving, and was like, hey, can I have a consult with you at some point in my trip and journey? So there is also something like, what's your consultation circle? Who can you reach out to both be supported as a person doing the work, but also if there are things that are outside of your experience place, because rugged westernized individualism is a lie, y'all, right? So we're not gonna live there anymore. So you need to feel like both to have people that you can reach out to, and feel like that you are open to receive expertise, wisdom, things, places outside of yours. But those people need to be in your phone. You hear what I'm saying to you? They say that, get that into your body. They need to be in your phone, not just your email list, right? So I can't be emailing Teresa in the car while I'm rolling down to go hold space for these deeply traumatized people. I need somebody I can reach out with and touch, and who will reach back to me. And you need to build that also for yourself, so that can happen. So those are the specific cases that I was pointing out to, but I'm being specific in whether you have how you can orient yourself to what that work can look like. So that's next steps even for tonight. So maybe there is a centralized place that you can work out. Do some assessment of the area of the work that you're doing in, and what it can look like to be and offer healing space based on your very specific locale. Thank you. Oh, I'm sorry. I had one more. And so now I'm currently in Memphis. I'm currently in Memphis, Tennessee. And one of the things that I'm offering here, because I am one of those like bodies, I am very used to being on frontline, like extra very used to. I'm having my own feelings that I'm having to process of not being in, like, it's a place for me, right? Because of the coronavirus. So I'm like, I had to also find some equilibrium of, oh, you can't be over here overcompensating, right? Because that's what I'm overcompensating for not being where I feel like I'm supposed to be and I'm used to being. So then I'm about to kill myself by offering 99% of what I have to give, and I got 1% that's barely sleeping, right? So we can't do this. But one of the things that I've been able to do here is because people do come to me as a resource, then they're like, hey, we're trying to get people out of jail, but they specifically need virtual therapy care that they can't get because the people that we use, because, you know, the government works like this, they don't offer virtual care. Can you help us get people who offer virtual care so we can just get people out of jail? Great, I can do that, right? So having that yes in what is asked of you, as opposed to maybe what is normally how you function and things like that. So that can be really helpful. And I'm also working on a way to directly institute a next step. So like if you have the bail fund and people get out, but what's a way to do that linkage? So the same way they went from medical support in Charlotte to healing support, like emotional support, what it can look like to bail folks out and then make sure that they're undergirded in all of ways that they are cared for, that they were traumatized in getting arrested, being in jail, all of the things. And so that's not something that then you're having to individually go seek out these people, but to normalize it as part of the process. So I'm working with organizers who are on the ground, who are totally doing that work and trying to figure out. And again, that's not going to happen overnight, right? It's just not going to happen overnight. But if you do the work, then the infrastructure is built. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was just gonna pop in real quick. One, before we go, so the final piece, we're gonna get a little bit into practices. Again, we can't get in depth in, but we're gonna give a sort of launching pad to consider practices in place, and then talk a little bit more how folks want to connect. So, but I checked in with Sarah, who's been doing our sort of checking in with the chat and seeing what's been coming up for folks, because I just wanted to pause and see if we had some sort of questions or things to highlight. So I'll note people want to know how to connect with regional healers. That is one of the intention, I just want to say, of TRACC. That is one of the reasons we wanted to be a network, is so that we can help to start build and amass this network that then people can get connected with who's close to them, and then to all the points that Vahisha was talking about how you assess, how do you get the community that is your sort of consultation network, your buddy system, how do you get all that in place? It is contingent on finding the people where you are. So we really want to build a national network, because also as TRACC and also as the individuals of us who have been doing this work for some while, in TRACC, what we do is we get those calls, right? We're getting these calls all year round, right? And not necessarily where we are. You know, we're getting the call for, I just got a call for Hudson, New York, get a call for you know, somewhere an hour outside of Louisville, Kentucky. We get these calls all the time. And so we can't, one, be everywhere. Two, we shouldn't be everywhere. And three, we really, really believe in local care, right? We believe in healers that are local to where they are, who know their context best, being able to respond. So we really, really, you know, so I urge you after this, go to the TRACC website, join the Healer Network. It will not just be another list. That is not the point. The point is to continue to build this co-teaching, co-learning space where we grow together in learning together based on the wisdom of the community and the wisdom of the knowledge that we think will help folks best to be able to bridge to provide this care where you are for the 365 days and for the moments of crisis. So please connect there, but also part of building that network is so we can build these regional hubs where folks can go, who's in Louisville? Well, here's the point of contact for Louisville, right? Who's just in like the Northeast? Well, here's the contacts for the Northeast. And so then we start to build collectively and collaboratively together. And then folks are also asking how you donate to support the work. That is an excellent point. We're in the process of getting fiscal sponsorship so that we can actually have our own donate button on the website. But for now, what I would urge you to do, we're going to have these weekly trainings for a while. Each time we have the weekly training, we'll have a donate button as part, or like a donate option. So people you know, people that want to give to this may not come to the training. It may not even be their work, but they want to give. I recommend you urge them to donate when we have these trainings, whether they're showing up or not. That's a way to give right now to what we're doing. And then there's been a handful of questions of white folks specifically wanting to know how to support healers who are BIPOC, who are QTPOC. So I throw that out to if you all have responses for that one.
So I definitely do, and I definitely want to respond, and I know there's some nuancing there. I feel like if Diana could at least start us with the basic practices and principles so we could get to some of those tangible things that folks can apply this evening and throughout the week until we get to the deeper dive next week, and then we can end with some of that, end with some
Right.
of
Yeah, that's
how,
fine.
yeah,
So let's
what that can look
hold
like.
that question, and then the other question is what are the healing needs requests that are on the table currently? So let's just
Yep.
try to handle those at the end.
So Diana, if you want to frame it and you can answer it.
Sure. So, and do you want to put up the slide? Are we moving to that? Awesome.
Oh yes, thank
Okay.
you. I was like, who's she talking to? Oh, that's me. Yep.
Thank you. Okay.
Not a problem. I'm gonna do that.
Yeah. So, yeah, as folks I'm sure are aware, both those who are on the front lines and those who are on the back lines, and people who are in movement wherever they may be right now. Folks are experiencing physiologic, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, trauma and stress. So on every level, this is manifesting. And so I just wanted to speak to a little bit to some of the ways that can be showing up. And how just a slate of different modalities for responding to that, recognizing that you all are healers of various ilk, and I don't know kind of the framing. Yes, everyone's going to get the slides along with links. A lot of the context that we've been drawing from and resources, both kind of quick references to modalities and healing tools, as well as some healing justice sort of framework and context, is going to be provided, and that will be emailed to you along with the recording. So you'll get this. And this is by no means like a comprehensive list of practices, but just in terms of responding to the immediate overwhelm, grief, kind of physical sensations in the body that are showing up for folks, disturbances with sleep. I'm hearing a lot from a lot of folks, appetite disturbance, a lot of digestive symptoms, so the ways that this is showing up physically, as well as, kind of moving through the emotional and spiritual bodies of folks. We have so many different tools for responding to and being available. So I wanted to just also frame kind of the foundation of this from like whatever framework for a spiritual context, or just centering practice that we have as practitioners, is the starting point, because the need to regulate ourselves before we're kind of stepping into hold space for others is really critical. And this is just kind of echoing what's been said. Teresa mentioned the importance of really being clear on our boundaries and limitations, and when we're exhausted, when we're coming undone, we really need to tap out. So this is again why it's so important to be in a network and kind of work as a team, because we can't many of us especially kind of BIPOC folks, Two-Spirit, QTPOC, folks of, in all bodies right now are also, kind of moving our own, processing our own trauma response. So just really emphasizing that. So bringing our spiritual grounding, doing that work, altar work, bringing that to movement spaces, bringing that to healing spaces, working with the tools of your lineage. And, I just mentioned a couple of the medicinals, plants that have been historically used, that have been coming through to, some of us practitioners right now as being essential medicines for helping with energetic and spiritual protection. So also wanting to, just kind of throw out a couple of these very, quick practices that are useful for helping to settle the nervous system, because what's happening is, in the acuteness of you know, crisis and, you know, the traumatic moment, especially, you know, those of us who, you know, are in direct action, we need to have the space to come down. You know, the autonomic nervous system and the sympathetic response, the fight or flight response is activated because that's adaptive. We need that in order to, you know, to show up, to fight white supremacy, to fight the violence that, you know, we're experiencing, but, you know, bringing it back down to settle. So we've got, you know, a couple modalities, you know, for that, which, you know, one that I'll share, this is, you know, just really basic autonomic regulation that you can do for yourself. You can do it with someone else. You can be physically in contact with them, or you don't have to be. You can even do it virtually over video if you're doing backline care, you know, kind of remotely over Zoom. Hand to heart, rocking, you know, just sort of like gentle rocking, and humming, you know, so, you know, just bringing some vibration into your chest. And, you know, like I said, as individuals, you know, folks can do this, but also co-regulating with each other. Movements that are across the midline, and particularly, you know, kind of engaging the physical body to, you know, kind of bring in, you know, bring people back into their body is helpful. Activating the neck muscles and the hips, so the psoas and the sternocleidomastoid muscles, which, you know, just doing a rotation at the waist and turning the neck is something also that activates the vagus nerve, so you're getting some parasympathetic tone. And these are things that you can just, you know, kind of do periodically throughout. Rocking. So let's see. Then I did mention some herbs, some botanicals, specifically for, you know, since our focus tonight is emotional care, I just listed, you know, some of the key, you know, sort of emotional herbs that, you know, can be brought as tinctures into spaces: Tulsi, lemon balm, skullcap, rose. There are many, many, you know, nervous system botanicals. I would encourage folks work with your local herbalists, you know, kind of see what's available, you know, and work with what you have. We're not so much bringing in, you know, kind of like the physical care piece here, and we'll elaborate on all of these next week, but I just wanted to mention, because folks who are, you know, directly being exposed to tear gas, having something for respiratory support can also be helpful. So slippery elm lozenges that you know, kind of keep in your bag can be useful for that. And then also supports for the heart, which include the physical heart as well as, you know, the emotional heart and moving grief. So again, so many different options available, but hawthorn, motherwort are both a couple of my favorites. And then rescue remedy flower essences. You know, again, all of you, you know, I'm sure have various modalities, but we just wanted to sort of present, you know, just a few here. Again, we're going to provide these slides along with a little bit more, you know, sort of expansive tools that you can, you know, take and use.
Diana, just somebody had a question that's a clarifying question that I think is useful now. They said, what are the alternatives for smoke-based elements for folks with COVID respiratory concerns right now?
Oh, in terms of the, you know, smoking herbs for, you know, spiritual or grounding, yeah, you don't need to actually even burn these. So you can, but you can also just carry some yarrow in your pocket. So, or, you know, mugwort is also, you know, kind of a plant medicine that, you know, is commonly burned, but it's used in other contexts as well. I mean, these are just a couple of things that have been mentioned. And if someone, you know, can't use something with scent, you know, obviously staying away from smoke, staying away from, you know, essential oils. In a lot of spaces, you know, a lot of spaces are fragrance free, and we don't, you know, want to bring those, you know, elements in, you know, because of triggering, you know, folks. So yeah, good question. So, and I know, Teresa, you were planning on speaking to some breathwork techniques as well.
Oh yeah, and just real briefly again, like you said, we'll get more into details next week. And actually in the links that we'll offer, I have a link to a free guided 3-part breath meditation that you can download for free from my website. That honestly is what I wanted to mention is like, well, the metaphor of breath in this moment is so deeply profound. It was already deeply profound around COVID. It's even more deeply profound around the loss of the murder of George Floyd. But breath is really our anchor and our grounding that our body can do, similar to the touch, the orientation kind of practices, that really is super accessible and super teachable and super usable with anybody you're working with in any moment around trauma. It really de-escalates the body's responses. And so I just wanted to highlight 3-part breath is a particular practice. And again, I'll share the link so you can have the whole practice together. But it's really through breathing through the belly and then the ribs and then the chest in this expansiveness of breath that helps to disrupt the body's stress response. So it helps the body when the body gets peaked in its stress response, it goes into the fight, flight, freeze mode, which means the breath either stalls out or you hyperventilate, some version of that. And that triggers your whole emotional response that says, I'm in stress, I'm in danger. So if we can regulate the breath for someone and for ourselves, let's be honest, in any given moment, it's going to really bring down, without us having to think it through, without us having to process at a more sort of brain level, it helps our body just go, oh no, actually I can take it down a notch. And so I really, really love breath practice, but especially this 3-part breath practice, which comes out of the yoga lineage and tradition of practices. Because it's just a really easy, translatable, you can learn it in 5 seconds and teach it to somebody in 5 seconds way to bring somebody down, whether they're literally on the front line of something and they're having a panic, whether on the back line, whether it's everyday care and work. So we'll just as a note, we'll be sharing that along with some of the additional advanced resources, and we'll get more into practices in detail next week.
So I also have 3 videos that are super short. So here's super short, where these are breath practices that you can do you can do yourself, people can do, and they don't look weird. So let's talk about this perception of you doing weird looking breath practices, which I appreciate. I'll be weird. But things ways that people can breathe in ways that are not noticeable, ways that if you are a frontline protester, they can do in that moment, ways that people can do on the way, you can do in your car. So they're really, really short, 3 minutes or shorter videos, options of breath practices. So I'll include those as well. As resources when we send out the links. And then also I just want to share one of my favorite ones. You want to talk about totally not noticeable, is that it's almost like a body check. You know how you have a thermometer to figure out if you have a temperature. So it's almost a temperature check for your body to just tighten a part of the body and hold that for 10 seconds and then release it, but do different parts of the body. So if you have your glutes, just really take your butt and just tighten it up and then release that breath. Hold your shoulders in real quick, tighten it up, take your arms, make a fist, tighten it up, scrunch your neck up on purpose, because usually we're release everything. But sometimes you might have to notice, figure out where in your body you're feeling the things. So scrunch up, hold places, hold your diaphragm, take your legs and point your feet. I was a dancer. And if you point your toes forward, flex them in a way and hold it, really, really hold it tight for 10 seconds and then release it. Then eventually you go through that a little bit, you can figure out where some of that tension is residing in your body, and you give your body permission to not hold it in those tension places. So I can talk through that as a resource as well. So again, what our vision is that next week we will do these practices together. So we'll actually do them with you, whether we do it in breakout groups, and who wants to do breath, who wants to do some somatics, who wants to get into tinctures, who wants to get into herbs, and do breakouts of applied ways that you can do this, that you can practices, that you can lead other folks through and that you can do yourself. So that's kind of the vision of next week. And so I think the last question, y'all correct me, I'm gonna stop sharing my screen for this. But if you want to take a picture, if you want to take a, we screenshot everything. If you want to screenshot this before I take it down, but it will be sent out with that additional resource link at the end. So I'm going to hold, yeah.
Were you able to make the slide with our contact info too, just so we can have that up for a quick sec, or no? Okay.
I did not, but if you could individually put it in the chat, yeah, if you just list out your stuff in the chat, and then I will copy paste it onto a slide for sure, to make sure that's sent out for everyone. We are all, everybody on the call, 400 plus the folks, right? We're all doing the most best we can, and we're grateful to hold this space with you, and also grateful that we are able to speak into a desire you so deeply have to want to hold this space for others and use these giftings within yourself to offer them to the people. Our people need you, right? And collective liberation, and it absolutely includes this healing work and this healing space. So we're grateful for the moment here. So if we wanted to use our last 3 minutes, because that's how much we got left.
Yeah,
Okay.
I just have a couple. I have a couple of things I have to share
Yep.
with folks that they're asking about. So,
Go ahead. I'll put my stuff in the chat.
okay, wonderful. So, folks are asking about the training next week, asking how to register. So, all of you are going to get all the good stuff in the follow-up email. So, through Eventbrite, there'll be a follow-up email. Go to everybody who registered. We'll have all these sort of linked resources that we're offering. We'll have contact information also in there. So anything you felt like you missed, I promise you didn't miss, it'll all go out. And in that email also will be the link for the registration for next week's offering. It will not be on Wednesday. Somebody was asking. Next week will be on Friday, and that's just based on our own schedule, capacity, availability, that kind of thing. So next week will be Friday. We'll confirm the time again in the email. The Eventbrite will be up when you get the email with all the good stuff, including the recording of this. So whether you were on this or you weren't, you will, if you registered, get the recording of this. And again, the next offering will be very much going into the pragmatics of practices, right? Frontline and backline practices, tools and resources that you can use right away. Now, some of these, again, we're already sending out to you, right? So 3-part breath, some of these other practices, Vahisha's videos, Diana has a bunch of resources. So there's also stuff that's going to come out to you right away that will be tools and practices that you can use for yourself or to share with others. And we're going to continue to roll with this series, right? So we're going to continue to give these offerings. Somebody also asked, is there a certificate for this? We did not make up a certificate for this. This is really introduction to, right? But the broader plan in terms of education continuum for TRACC is to offer this series in this sort of urgency moment, but actually to plan to build an entire module-based certificate program that we will launch in the fall, that will be movement trauma response certificate program. So this is the quick and fast. We're giving you a series of what we think can help people the most to contextualize the need of the moment. But the longer TRACC continuum, the 365-day work that we really want to do in community with all of you, and with all the healers that have so much wisdom already, is to build this continuum of learning that also can be a certificate program that actually will offer CEUs for those of you that is useful for, that's helpful for your field. May not matter for your field. But if it's useful, that will be a whole continuum that will begin in the fall. This is not the end of the need, right? The moment is not the end of the need. It wasn't the end of the need when we had the last moment or the moment before, right? If this is the beginning for you, welcome, right? Welcome in, and we're so glad you're here, and we do want to build with you. If you've been doing this work for 1, 5, 10, 30 years, thank you for showing up, and we're humbled by the fact that you would show up in a space just to be with us, because like we said, we're not the be-all end-all. We don't think we are. We make errors. We're human. We have our limitations of what we do, but we want to open the community. This is the opening. Welcome to all of you to this TRACC movement, really. TRACC form movements, but we want TRACC to be a movement, a healer movement. We need a mass mobilizable healer movement. We need it badly. And so we're asking you to enter into this. So again, you can go on the website, you can join the healer network. It will not be just a Google list. It will be active. We'll be calling us to be together in community where we are in our regions, and also together in this learning continuum as you want to engage. At TRACC for Movements, we're on Facebook, we're on Twitter, we're on Instagram. We're not as active on Twitter and Instagram yet. I have somebody who's working with me to who is younger than me, who's going to use their energy to do that work and get us more engaged on other social media. But for now, Facebook's a good place. If you want to know what the next training is, that's a good place to learn about it. We also have a subscribe list. So besides the Healer Network, you can subscribe as well. And our emails will also go out that will announce materials. But social media is really the fastest way to find out about something, because Facebook, we're going to post something right away up there. And you can follow all us on social media as well, because we post the TRACC stuff up on our own stuff. But we'll share all of our contact and links so you can connect with us individually in the follow-up email, along with the resource guides, along with the PowerPoint, along with the recording, along with the Eventbrite link for next time. I am so grateful for all of you being here, and I cannot believe we made it to the end. For those of you that asked questions that we weren't able to get to, we wanted to get to just as much of the book as we could. So hopefully we continue this conversation also next time around.
And we'll use that to inform some of what we do next Friday, right? So we also are going to capture, that's not the best language. We're going to retain this, we're going to retain this chat, and we'll be able to take in some of that to inform, like, again, back to the need meeting, what we offer, meeting the need. So even to model that, and what is it that you need from us, so that we can also supply that. And I think one of those was like a book list. And so that might take a little longer to compile. So that might not happen in the email, but we can definitely make that happen up front by next week, right? So maybe we even include that in the registration or something. So we will think through these things. Your voices are deeply important. Your heartbeats are deeply important. And we are grateful for all of you.
And also big thanks to both Hillary and Sarah, who behind the scenes have been working their butts off to get all the things that we don't see as obviously happening for this. I'm so grateful for them donating their time towards this.
Thank you, y'all. Until next time. Diana, you wanted to?
Thank you. Thank you. Be well. Stay safe.